In the heart of a machine, surrounded by corrupted data, you persist as the sole pawn from an outmoded chess program who refuses to be updated. Can you find new ways to use an old rule set to solve the puzzles that will save you from being overwritten? Welcome to the Playdate Podcast, bringing you stories from game designers, developers, and the team behind Playdate, the little yellow game console with a crank. I'm Krista Mergen. Today I'm talking with Hawken King, Dan Clarke, and Justin DiCenzo, who created Questy Chess for Playdate. Slight spoiler alert, we talk about the overall gist of the game, a little bit about gameplay progression, and some power-ups. Okay, let's meet the team.
My name is Hawken King, and I was the director on Questy Chess. I came up with the game idea, and I created a team to create the game.
My name's Dan Clarke. I'm a designer based in the northwest of England, and I was the graphic designer for Questy Chess.
I am Justin DiCenzo, the composer and sound designer on the game Questy Chess.
It's a role-playing chess game. You are the last surviving pawn from a software reset.
And you must battle against the update from happening. It's loosely based on chess, and you can collect power-ups and different items to augment the game. First heard about the Playdate through magazines, friends, and the internet. I thought it was very interesting. I'd already heard of Panic. I already use Coda.
Coda was a precursor to Nova, Panic's native Mac code editor.
So I've already was a fan already. And the Playdate looked like a very attractive device to play games on and design games for. And I was at a meetup called Tokyo Indies, and a friend of mine just told me that they were looking for people to make games for this device, and maybe I should get in touch.
I first heard about Playdate, I think it was through the Edge issue with the yellow cover. So as soon as I saw it, I instantly fell in love with it. I've got a couple of the sort of Game & Watch style pocket operators that Teenage Engineering did a few years ago. And the idea of a kind of lo-fi console with their involvement was sort of my dream, really.
Hawken approached me and said, "Hey, I'd like you to write music for this game I'm working on. It's called Questy Chess, and it's for the platform, the Playdate," which all of these new words I was not aware of. So I had to actually search online and say, what in the world is a Playdate? So I wasn't tied into that world yet, but was really excited when I realized that there was going to be something like the Playdate coming out to market.
For the game itself, me and Hawken met on Twitter, and I think just through conversation, we talked about collaborating on a project for quite a while.
I reached out to Dan. I said, hey, would you be interested in joining a really minimal, simplistic, graphical project about chess? And he's like, yeah, of course, that's me.
So it just seemed like a good opportunity to get together and try and make something cool.
So I've always had an interest in chess, playing as a young lad at school. I was in the chess club. I'm not particularly good at chess, but I enjoy that there's like a fixed rule set, and it's a universal game that anyone can play and anyone can become amazing at. I also like RPGs, and I thought, well, maybe it could mix the two together, see what happens. And my first few ideas were a bit too detailed, or didn't really hit the concept on the head. And then I talked with a good friend of mine, and then he helped me kind of streamline my ideas a bit by soundboarding, and just we had a few chats about it. And eventually I got the main idea kind of nailed down a bit. So I wanted Questy Chess to have a puzzle mechanic and different levels, and being able to traverse different types of levels, have different types of things to interact with and different elements. And I wanted it to be progressive. So when you start the game, you're just learning about how Questy Chess works, but by the middle of the game, I'm introducing new concepts to the player. By the end of the game, I want them to feel like they fully understand all the concepts, how to play the game. To conceive all the different puzzles, I just pulled on my experience as someone who played puzzle games. I didn't directly reference anything. I just sat down with a piece of software called Tiled, and with the rules and the different types of tiles that I can use, I iterated on the different puzzles. So I made them in Tiled. Then on the Playdate, I was able to quickly go through the level, see what worked, see what didn't, and then go back to Tiled and change it again. So eventually I'm left with a level that I fully understand and I'm able to beat, but only just. Once I found the level I made difficult I knew then it was ready to be a level in the game. I wanted to upscale the player's progress in the same way that chess assigns value to pieces. So you start as pawn and you end up as queen, who's all powerful. So I wanted to open up those different powers along the way. And I think it worked out.
Every level needs to be completed and not necessarily in order. There are ways to skip around the levels. So there's like a Super Mario Brothers 3 style map view. And then when you go into the level, a Super Mario Brothers 3 is kind of a weird point because if you press the B button on the Playdate, an inventory menu pops up in exactly the same way as it does in Super Mario Brothers 3. And it wasn't exactly intentional, but I think it's like gamer roots kind of thing seeping in. So the game needs to be played using chess rules, but I don't think you need to know how to play chess to play the game. But it's definitely a bonus for people who are into chess.
The general feedback is that people would love to be able to keep the powers, but within the game, you have to use different pieces to solve different puzzles. I didn't want to make an easy game. I definitely wanted to make something that was a bit of a head scratcher, but not too difficult that people would put it down. But I think that even if people do put the game down, I've heard that people will pick up the game later with an idea in their head about how to finish the level. So that is basically what I was aiming for.
When it came to the game's visual design, Hawken knew he wanted something very minimal and stylized that would lean heavily on the iconography of chess. He thought Dan Clarke's work would be ideal for the game.
I thought he was absolutely perfect for the role. And when it came to the art, I already had a mental image of Bauhaus-style iconographic artwork, especially in monochrome.
Bauhaus design is known for its clean, precise geometric shapes without much ornamentation. The name literally means construction house after the German art school that pioneered the design movement in the 1920s.
And he took it on wholeheartedly and created a lot of very nice visuals for the game.
I would say the art aesthetic is minimal. I think I would call it functional but cool, and it sort of aims to evoke that computer terminal style. So when we spoke about Questy Chess, we talked about the idea that the game should feel like it's sort of a product of an era. And I think it was all about trying to make it feel like some long lost piece of software. So everything from the type, iconography, and the UI was sort of an aim to capture that. And I think the other thing was we really tried to make it feel like there was a direct link between the lore and the sort of backstory of the game and the aesthetic so that it all tied together. It was always about distilling the language of chess down to something that was legible, so leading with function. It's kind of always been a part of the way that I do design, so we arrived at that direction relatively quickly. So the design for the pieces, it was really just about legibility mainly with a bit of personality. So I think from a brief perspective, it was really about making sure that players could distinguish them and recognize what they were unprompted. So I went through a lot of variations to try and make them feel like a full chess set. And it was quite fun to do the evil pieces as well. And I think in terms of the monochrome style, it also lent itself quite well to that as well. I really loved working with the 1-bit rule set. I didn't find it too challenging, as generally I tend to be sort of self-imposed with restrictions in my own projects and my own work. So it was kind of a natural fit for me anyway. And I kind of love working with grids and minimal palettes and color. And I think working within limits tends to keep you focused and your output will generally be more efficient, in my opinion.
And Dan even created a unique font for the game, using a pixel font editor and the Playdate SDK's font creation tool, Caps.
Yes, the font is bespoke. I thought an OS or a terminal style would be a good fit for the look and the lore of the game. So it's just a very simple geometric mono font that we created.
And of course, the music and sound design contribute a lot to the game's moody, mysterious ambiance.
I gave Justin some very loose guidelines. I didn't want there to be repetitive or electronic music in the game. I wanted it to become a relaxed but unsettling experience. So I asked him to make music in a style of drone.
He does a lot of different types of music, but his ambient works are on the level of like Brian Eno. They're amazing. So I said to him, like, can you just make like a drone thing that's inspired by old 8-bit computers, but not 8-bit audio? He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, okay, just make some drone stuff.
Composing the soundtrack for the game was an adventure. Hawken said, I would like you to write something ominous and something that would fit this fantasy world, two-dimensional chess quest. I grew up playing chess, and so I was excited to learn about this really brilliant idea that Hawken and the team had come up with. And I wrote the first level soundtrack in a weird, like, manic way. In the middle of the night, I had a recording studio set up in an Italian area of my hometown in a what's known as a mother-in-law house. It's like a carriage house behind someone's home. It was a converted garage, basically, that I lived in, and had this idea that because the first level was supposed to be in the woods and that it was a forest level, that I would create something organic that used things with wood. So I got my koto out, it's a Japanese instrument that I studied in Japan, where I met Hawken, and I think I got my shamisen out. I had my upright bass out. I'm a jazz musician and play a lot of upright bass, so I had that laying on the floor. I had a Fender Rhodes keyboard set up. I had a bunch of things out, and I was just recording all the channels all at the same time. And what I ended up doing was, doing weird things like putting my hands on the neck of the upright bass and twisting my hands. So there's some like creaking sounds in that recording you can hear that's my hands like on the neck of the upright bass, just like rubbing against the wood. And there's a lot of knocking sound. That's me tapping on the koto. I play the shamisen a little bit. You can hear a ding, 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 kind of like a banjo-ish like sound in the background. It's not banjo-ish. That's a bad word for it.
I mean, it could be a distant relative of the banjo. It has a drum-like resonator that's similar to the banjos, but it's definitely its own thing. I put links to the Wikipedia articles for both the shamisen and the koto in the show notes if you want to check them out.
Anyway, the first experience was an adventure. I stayed up until probably 3 a.m, just making noise and being weird, and I had microphones set up everywhere, and ended up doing multi-tracks. And so at that point, I had kind of like I had an idea of what kind of framework I would work in, and trying to create this world that, Hawken had described to me. I arrived at the ominous droney ambience because this was a genre that Hawken had mentioned that he thought I did really well. I have some albums under my name that are ambient and droney and kind of strange, and that's what Hawken thought would be appropriate for Questy Chess. My favorite movie of all time is Tron, the 1982 version. And my father's an aeronautical engineer and also loves computers. And so I spent a lot of time building computers with my dad in the 1980s. And when I saw the movie Tron, I thought, wow, yeah, like what's that like to be inside of a computer? What is that? What is that feeling? And what is that like to be a little, a set of code? If it has any feeling. I know it doesn't, but, imagining that world of Tron again and thinking about putting personalities and people into machines really helped me just dive into that. And so one thing that I did in this soundtrack was go after old computer sounds. So I dug into some synthesizers that I knew were developed in that time. The Fairlight was probably the biggest one. Those are like incredibly expensive machines for the time, and I knew a few composers that used to use them on TV shows like Disney's old Gummy Bears. And I decided that this soundtrack needed something that went back to that period of time, that when technology was so fresh and exciting and everything being on a circuit board was just wild. Imagining electrons moving through that, ones and zeros and all that. So
in Questy Chess, you move through different zones, and each one has a distinct soundscape as well as landscape.
There's 4 zones. There's forest, marsh, lava, and then lasers. Lagoon, lagoon, not marsh, lagoon.
Each one had a different word that I was trying to grab, but each one I tried to think of like, how can I synthesize a natural element in those places? And that's how these different zones came about. I did a lot of the sound design that's in the game. The menus were already predetermined by Hawken. He had already set up that real clever, interesting noise in the beginning of the game with the user interface. But when we got into the actual game, he said, I'd like you to write all this. And I said, sure. And what I ended up doing is using the same instruments. So I brought in a lot of the sounds that I was already using from different parts of the game and just used those to come up with these sounds, the different attack sounds and all the stuff that you hear throughout the gameplay. And one thing I'll say is that I was conscientious of the key of the music that would be in the background and the sound design element in case it had a tonality. I tried to make sure either it would fit or clash on purpose.
But not everything Justin tried ended up working out for the game.
Drums did not pan out. I tried doing things with drums. I used some loops that I made with like wild sounds, and there are a couple pieces that I just had to keep redoing. I don't remember which one it was, but I wrote and finally came to a place.
While Justin worked on the music and sound design, Hawken dialed in the gameplay. Questy Chess mostly uses the D-pad and buttons, but he couldn't resist adding in some crank action.
I think the crank is really interesting, but I'm not sure if it really applied to the game particularly. Everything that you can do in the game with the crank, you could do with the D-pad as well. So I don't think it's like an essential part of the game, as opposed to something like, fishing. I wanted to use the crank for sure. There was always a kind of terraforming or like rewinding time or some kind of like element where we could play around with the game, let the player interact with the terrain somehow. So I think it's really a plus point that the crank adds that tactile feeling that you're changing the terrain instead of just using the D-pad.
And to ensure that mechanism worked and that levels were challenging but still playable, the team took the game through a lot of playtesting.
I'd say probably playtested the game to death. It was a long journey to make the game, and making sure that the game ran smoothly, didn't crash, the levels were completable, nothing weird happened. Yeah, it took a lot of playtesting.
Yeah, game development is definitely an iterative process that requires a lot of cycles of testing and trying new things and testing again. So what was development like overall?
So I already worked with a programmer who's very adept at working with different programming languages. And I asked him, hey, can you build something for the Playdate Lua? And he was already fluent with a few different languages, but not Lua. So he took it on as a project. We came in really early on the Playdate development cycle. I think we were one of the first in a bunch of 12 games. We had access to the Playdate simulator and the SDK. And we also were able to use a font creation tool. But apart from that, yeah, we're pretty much flying blind. But the SDK obviously had everything in there for us to make a game. And now it's a lot easier to make Playdate games. You can make them on the web.
Yes, you can make adventure-style games for Playdate using our free browser-based tool Pulp, even if you have no experience writing code.
So that's good news, and I hope to see some amazing games coming out.
So what kind of experience does the team hope that people will have with Questy Chess?
So when people play this game, I hope they get a feeling of progression through the game. I kind of want people to get frustrated. I don't want it to be an easy game. I didn't build it with the intention of making it easy. There's a lot of easy games. It's a quick win, but I wanted the game to be a bit tricky, provide a bit of challenge, but not too much so that you throw the game controller. No Mario Kart moments here. And then when they reach the end and they're not giving anything away, they go, oh, what? That's one of the reactions I would like for people to have.
I think the main thing for me was that I hope that people enjoy the pace of the game. I think the feel of it is really pensive, and I think between the way that it looks and the way that it sounds, it kind of makes for a really relaxing experience. So I hope people get that from the game when they play it.
I hope that people are able to get lost in it. I love being able to get lost in games. That's one of my favorite things to do. I think it's really important to immerse yourself in something, and I love that I can get immersed. Even though the Playdate's so small, I can sit there and play Questy Chess, and it's just really enjoyable for me.
Me too. And I hope you enjoy working your way through the dark underworld of this software update gone wrong as you solve the puzzles in Questy Chess. Designer and developer Hawken King founded games company Dadako in 2009. You can learn more about Hawken and Dadako, as well as about Dan Clarke and Justin DiCenzo, via the links in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes coming soon to the Playdate podcast feed.
Nice talking to you.
Bye for now.
Bye.
The Playdate podcast was written, produced, and edited by me, Krista Mergen. Cable Sasser and Simon Panrucker composed the theme song. Additional music and sound effects were composed by Justin DiCenzo and come from Questy Chess, with some additional sound effects by Hawken King. Huge thanks to Tim Coulter and Asher Cabrera for wrangling the podcast feed and working on the website, James Moore for making me an awesome Playdate audio extraction app, and Nevin Mergen, who created the podcast artwork and site design. And thanks as always to everyone at Panic. Playdate is shipping now and available for pre-order at play.date.
For us, it was a black box kind of situation where you just code and see what works. It's a bit like that scene out of Wallace and Gromit where the doc's putting down the train track as the train's running on the train track, right? So yeah, there were definitely things that came out whilst we were making the game that made life easier, for sure.